Oh, good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning after what was, an amazing concert, and I hope you all are having a terrific time at DerbyCon. So this is my talk, Patching, Show Me Where It Hurts. I'm encrypted. I have a real name of Cheryl. I'm from Canada, and you all are welcome there anytime. Can you hear me okay? Is this better? Yes? Okay. I'm not hearing the microphone. Uh-oh. Is that better? Yay, okay. All right. So I am very proud to be part of the Diana Initiative. We do an annual conference now to support diversity, women in tech, and you all are welcome to that as well. Finally, the views expressed here are mine alone, and not those of my employer. Okay, so why patching? Because it's a common pain point that we all share. It's also a necessary evil, and it happens to be a highly contentious and sometimes a divisive issue, for which there just don't seem to be any easy answers. Let's look back at 2017. What a year. First, we had Eternal Blue. We had WannaCry. And then we had Apache Struts. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Moving into 2018, and right out of the gate, we have Spectre and Meltdown. Oh, what joy. When was that dumpster fire hot enough for you? Now, on a serious note, we learned some very hard lessons from WannaCry about unpatched systems and vulnerable institutions like hospitals that could literally be the death of us because we don't have a good process in place, especially when ransomware comes to shut you down. Does anybody go to ShmooCon, or has anybody been? This year, Bruce Potter gave a rather eloquent rant about the patching process. It's not that easy, but it is easy to throw that phrase around. Why wouldn't you do it? It's a best practice, but the problem is the blame game isn't going to help us fix it. Does anybody know Wendy Nader? She is very wise and had some good things to say over the years about the realities of the patching process and business, enterprise, and the kinds of decisions you have to make. The kind of decisions that factor in a lot of things we don't see, can't know about, don't necessarily understand. And that really is what this talk is addressing. That patching is about the stuff we don't know. And that's where we get caught up. It's areas we don't have familiarity with. Areas of specialization. Think ICS, hospital equipment, and mainframes. But also older, legacy systems. Stuff that lives on for 20 and 30 years in a server closet because if you shut it down, a lot of people are going to stop working and then there is going to be hell to pay. And there just isn't anything else you can do. How do you fix that? Patching inevitably just gets ranked up with all of the other stuff enterprise has to deal with and the decision makers have to contend with. It constantly gets shuffled down to the bottom of the deck. So we get that it is a fundamental best security practice. But we keep getting frustrated by the fact that it isn't getting done or getting done right. Well, here's the pain points. It's true, isn't it? It is a convoluted process. If you've tried to sit down and figure out the instructions, sometimes those instructions just make no sense. It's messy. You can't get somebody to take ownership on it, especially when something goes wrong. And you have a lack of accountability because nobody really wants to get the finger of blame pointed on them for doing the right thing. We talk about misconfigurations, and if you've been looking back at the year, we've had a series of misconfigurations on major databases stored in cloud. They got owned seriously because settings were misconfigured. That's a people problem. that's something that we can actually take ownership on. Does this sound familiar? It feels a lot more like ongoing crisis management. Only nobody wants to have to take on the added burden of doing process review. Does anybody here want to do process review? Put up your hand, because I could hire you. 3 words, yes. We have issues. So, survey says patching sucks. This is the realities. Podium Institute did this survey of what it takes to actually put a patching process in place, the number of people. This should come as no surprise to us. We know that we're outmanned and outgunned. So I would say, for us anyway, 3 words: prioritize, optimize, and automate. Only. That's easier said than done. Ah, the good old days. Remember the good old days when it was just all about Patch Tuesday? Got ready for Patch Tuesday. We had some tests set up. Everybody knew it was coming. Not anymore. Now we've got staggered releases. We've got out-of-band releases. We've got previews. And we've got something called supersedence. Does anybody have a particular favorite of those that they hate? We've done a lot of out-of-band releases. So, from an enterprise perspective, which comes down on our shoulders, how do we manage the downtime with the uptime? And then, who has had the joy of trying to identify who the stakeholders are so that you can inform the stakeholders, so that you can get the sign-off from the stakeholders and circle around back to get everybody in. A week has passed, quite honestly, before you actually get to do what you need to do. So we're damned if we do. Because yes, stuff goes wrong. Spectre and meltdown. I've lived through that. Put up your hands. How many people had to deal with the dumpster fire of Spectre and meltdown this year? I will have sympathy cookies for you. And then we are damned if we don't. Yes, the cure may seem worse than the disease, but WannaCry was the case in point for everybody. It was a huge wake-up call, especially for people who thought they were adequately protected, because then not Petya circled around and people found out they weren't. That patch you might have thought you'd applied wasn't there. So based on what we are learning, how do we help organizations to do this better? How do we make it a less bitter pill to swallow? So yes, good patches do go bad. Things will go wrong. What we need is not just a patching process, but a process that addresses what do we do when shit happens. Okay, there are those patches that go terribly, horribly wrong. Forget bad days. Some people have bad years. I'm not going to name and shame any vendors, but somebody's had a really bad year so far, and their adaptive security appliance was a critical 10 for the CVE, and then the patching really didn't go right, and they had to reissue it. And then some stuff got owned further down the line, and this is a case in point that the people whom we rely on can become our biggest liability. I'm not going to say that it's anybody's fault. It's that we need to be prepared for the fact that the stuff we rely on, that is integral to how we run our businesses, won't always work as planned. We can prepare for that. We didn't necessarily know to prepare for this. 20 and 30 years in the making, system-wide vulnerabilities are another issue. But now we know that these actually exist and that there are going to be more of them. Why? Because, quite simply, we did not know then what we do know now. That's pretty much the thing we can extrapolate further to all of the other things, systems that we rely on. What might potentially go wrong because of simple ignorance around what we were going to be using it for 30 years in the future. It's just a realistic thing. Do we have backups in place? How have we tested those backups? Do we have an alternative to the backups in place? We hear stories about people who discover that the tapes, the backups, the systems, when they run them, failed. That was an awful surprise. But not one that had to happen. It comes down to the price we were willing to pay for speed and performance, rather like a buy now, pay later plan, except we're getting served the bill now. And there's a constant refrain in business because, 2 words, innovation, disruption. Everybody wants to be the first to the finish line. So we kind of leave security behind in the dust in order to make it there. So I would say you need to question the process when doing things right gets left out of the process. Oh my God. IoT. Yes, this is going to be, it's at the root of all evil. Why do we have to make things that connect to everything? But we do. This is our way of our life. We are constantly building stuff so that it connects. And anything we build, we have to find a way to connect it. We need to go back and then find a way to make something that was actually never meant to connect to our systems, to the Wi-Fi, to the great world beyond. Get plugged in, because everything else does. So, we also deal with the problem around basic good procedures. We know the hell that passwords are. But on IoT devices, passwords are a new special kind of hell. They're hard-coded. You can't update firmware. Who here has tried to update firmware on an IoT device? A router, or was it easy? Okay. For you it was easy? Good. Maybe. What did you have and I'll buy it? No. Okay. Okay. For most people, for our neighbors next door, changing the default setting on their cable TV box is hard. Trying to update the router firmware for their small office, home office device is impossible. And we have so many people with so many of those issues to contend with. The Nintendo Switch, something that you want to play with, something that you want to use, but trying to update the firmware to address a vulnerability was a major issue. That's my case in point. So let's talk a little bit about specialized systems that are very vulnerable. ICS SCADA. Does anybody work in that realm? Okay. So I have a friend, Chris Sistrunk. He spoke here actually yesterday. It's an ongoing issue, and he'll talk about systems where there's, first of all, there's very little network monitoring, and they need to increase that because they're connecting more systems. But these systems were designed 30 years ago with the intention that they would not be connected. They were going to do one thing and one thing only, but they've been expanded now, and people are connecting them. Sometimes because they think it's a good idea, sometimes because somebody just needs the convenience of having a connection. But a 30-year-old system that's often left unpatched because they don't want it to break is hugely vulnerable. These are our electricity. This is our power grids, our water systems, nuclear power plants, traffic lights. So yes, operational technology is something most of us don't have familiarity with, and we need to understand why they don't patch and find a way to make it possible to work with them, to understand where their vulnerabilities are so that we can make these inherently insecure connections better. Medical devices. We've heard some horror stories about pacemakers and insulin pumps. Again, it's the same issue. These are very specialized components, and the testing on them has to be done in conjunction with what the needs of the medical practitioners require, and not what we think is best. This is where the butting of heads occurs. It's hard choices based on realistic issues. There are some great people doing some fantastic work here, so a shout out to I Am the Cavalry and Josh Corman, Yelena, Audie, and thanks to everybody who is trying to make headway and raise awareness about this particular set of issues. There was some frightening statistics that came out in the aftermath of WannaCry about the National Health Services in England, and the reality about how many of these hospitals simply are not in a position to apply patches or update the operating systems. There's an opportunity, if we can find it, to work with them to make this better. All right, does anybody work with mainframes? Well, again, specialized systems, the concept of walled garden, the thought that nobody is ever going to get in these. The realities with them are nobody touches the mainframe. It's very cloistered and very secured, and for the most part, they are very secure, hugely fast, reliable machines. But they do have vulnerabilities. You do scheduled downtimes, because if you don't, an unscheduled downtime for a mainframe, think of a couple of days of not being able to access your money from the bank. We had a couple of friends of mine here who actually ran an evil mainframe course about how you can hack a mainframe. Because, yes, Virginia, you can hack the mainframe. And sometimes you should, to test. All right, so how can we do this better? There are ways. Patching doesn't have to be the only option. Misconfiguration. This is a fact. So if we look at things like network setup, putting good basic practices, locking down ports that don't need to be open, setting up stronger firewall rules. A friend of mine, Ian Coldwater, gave an excellent talk yesterday about how you can attack Kubernetes, and she raised the exact same issues about firewall settings, ports left open, misconfiguration items that attackers find utilized to their advantage. So, testing and rollbacks, having backup plans in place and knowing what to do and how to use them. It comes as part of your disaster recovery plan, usually, but a lot of places just pay lip service to that. If you test it regularly, if you know what it is and how to use it, you aren't going to find out on the day of that it didn't work. Let's talk a little bit about visibility. Being able to see from end to end, understanding all of the things you have in play, where they are, what they do, and their priority. Do you know what your crown jewels are? Do you know where they're running? Do you know who to go to get answers on them when stuff goes down? Because I can tell you from experience, when you get hit with a critical vulnerability, management suddenly screaming, and your asset management program is not up to date. These are my 5 W's. So, as far as mitigations go, yes, you can have virtual patches. Tanya Yonka spoke about them. She does SecDevOps. But yes, virtual patches are a great mitigator if you aren't able to get in there and fix your virtual appliances and virtual firewalls. Bottom line, cybersecurity is not a band-aid solution. What we need to do is be able to work with our organizations, understanding their objectives, helping them understand what we do and how we can work with them to make things more secure. If we can identify the pain points, we can make for them a business case to give us the resources, the funding, and the cooperation we need to do this better. Because if we want to help management get the message, then we are the ones to write a new prescription for patching. And it's time for a second opinion. Thank you all very much. Are there any questions? Okay. Thanks again.